44 recognized outlaw motorcycle gangs. 6 major clubs controlling the balance of power. Thousands of members spread across an entire continent. Welcome to Australia's Big Six: Hells Angels, Comancheros, Mongols, Bandidos, Rebels, and one more shaping the national picture. But something has changed. The leather-clad bikers of the past are slowly disappearing. In their place is a new type of criminal. Younger, more diverse, less focused on motorcycles, and far more focused on money. By 2026, Australian organized crime has reached a turning point. Territory lines are being redrawn, old alliances are collapsing, and whatever emerges next will shape the underworld for decades to come. Understanding who controls what is no longer just curiosity. In some cases, it can be a matter of survival. Before examining today's territories, it is essential to understand the seismic shifts that have reshaped Australia's BIKIE landscape over the past 5 years. Much of what people think they know about these clubs is already outdated. As of 2026, Australia's Big Six outlaw motorcycle gangs remain the dominant forces in the criminal underworld. However, their influence varies dramatically by state and region. The Rebels Motorcycle Club remains the largest by membership. At their peak, they operated around 70 chapters, with more than 1,000 members and associates nationwide. Today, approximately 29 chapters remain active across Australia, giving them the widest geographic footprint of any club, with a presence in every state and territory. But size does not automatically equal power. Internal fractures and leadership conflicts have significantly weakened the rebels, creating openings for rival clubs to move into former strongholds with little resistance. The Hells Angels bring something few Australian clubs can match: global reach. With roughly 250 members across 14 Australian chapters, they are smaller in raw numbers than the Rebels. But worldwide, the Hells Angels operate nearly 600 charters across 66 countries with more than 6,000 members globally. Australian chapters benefit directly from this international network, gaining access to sophisticated criminal expertise, global drug trafficking routes, and financial resources that far exceed those of domestic-only organizations. The Comancheros have evolved dramatically since their founding in Sydney in 1968. Once a traditional motorcycle club, they now resemble a transnational organized crime syndicate more than a conventional BIKIE gang. Heavy recruitment from Middle Eastern communities has transformed their demographic makeup and operational style. Many members have never owned motorcycles, joining instead for access to criminal networks, financial opportunities, and protection. The club now functions as a highly structured criminal enterprise with national and international reach. The Mongols, founded in California in 1969, are a relatively recent but aggressive force in Australia. They have expanded rapidly, particularly in Queensland and New South Wales. Their American connections provide access to international drug markets and weapons trafficking networks. They have demonstrated a willingness to use extreme violence to claim territory, catching several established clubs off guard and triggering ongoing conflicts. The Bandidos trace their roots to Texas, where the club was founded in 1966. They maintain strong international ties and operate under a rigid hierarchical structure. Membership standards remain strict. Prospective members must be male and own a Harley-Davidson or approved American-made motorcycle. While this traditional approach limits rapid growth, it produces tighter internal cohesion and stronger discipline compared to more loosely structured clubs. The Phoenix Motorcycle Club, founded in Adelaide in 1969, has deep historical roots in South Australia and Victoria. Over time, they have expanded into other states while maintaining a strong cultural identity. Their long-standing presence in Adelaide gives them community connections and local influence that newer clubs struggle to replicate. Behind the scenes, they remain heavily involved in drug trafficking, extortion, and money laundering. Beyond these dominant players, law enforcement recognizes at least 38 other outlaw motorcycle gangs operating across Australia. These include the Gypsy Jokers, who maintain a strong presence in Western Australia, and the Black Ullans, who operate primarily in Queensland and New South Wales. Other groups include Highway 61, Life and Death MC, Descendants MC, and numerous smaller organizations. Some control specific towns or regions. Others maintain a limited Australian footprint while serving as extensions of international criminal networks. Together, these groups form a constantly shifting ecosystem, one where power is no longer defined solely by tradition, patches, or motorcycles, but by money, adaptability, and the ability to exploit opportunity in a changing criminal landscape. New South Wales remains the most fiercely contested state for BIKIE territory in Australia. Sydney alone hosts chapters from almost every major club, creating a dense and volatile patchwork of overlapping territories and ongoing rivalries. With its large population, wealthy suburbs, active drug markets, and major port infrastructure, NSW represents the most valuable prize in Australian organised crime. The Hells Angels have expanded their presence in New South Wales significantly over the past 2 years. In July 2025, they absorbed former Gladiators territory in the Hunter region and announced the formation of a Hunter Crew chapter. This move gave them control of a critical corridor between Sydney and Queensland along the Pacific Highway, one of Australia's key drug trafficking routes. The Hunter region offers strategic advantages. The Port of Newcastle provides access to international shipping, while lower law enforcement density compared to Sydney makes the area attractive for organised crime. December 2025. Raptor squad raids underscored the scale of the Hells Angels' reach, with 12 members arrested across suburbs including Pyrmont, Wentworth Point, Northmead, Emu Heights, Blacktown, Burwood, Razorback, Ambarvale, and Newtown. These locations range from affluent inner-city waterfront areas to working-class western suburbs and rural districts, highlighting the club's wide geographic footprint across metropolitan and regional New South Wales. The Comancheros maintain a strong presence in western and southwestern Sydney, particularly in areas with large Middle Eastern communities that form the core of their recruitment base. Police identify the club as heavily involved in drug trafficking, with links to Middle Eastern organised crime networks responsible for importing cocaine and methamphetamine through Sydney's ports. In January 2026, Raptor squad operations targeted a 37-year-old Comancheros member in Liverpool, accused of supplying firearms and prohibited drugs worth approximately $300,000 between June 2025 and January 2026. The case illustrates the club's continued criminal activity despite sustained law enforcement pressure. The rebels still operate chapters across New South Wales, but internal divisions have severely weakened their influence. The mass resignation of 36 members in mid-2024, following a leadership conflict between National President Damien Vella and Western Australian figure Carl Labrook, created gaps that rival clubs quickly exploited. Former Rebels members who defected to competing gangs brought with them insider knowledge of operations, territories, and vulnerabilities. This intelligence has been used to undermine rebel influence in areas they once controlled. The Mongols have expanded aggressively across New South Wales, focusing particularly on territories abandoned or weakened by rival clubs. Police intelligence indicates ongoing violent turf conflicts with the Comancheros in southeast Queensland that frequently spill into northern NSW. These confrontations have included shootings, assaults, and intimidation campaigns, leaving some border communities reluctant to cooperate with police out of fear of retaliation. The bandidos retain a presence in the ACT and surrounding NSW regions, including Queensland and the South Coast. However, police reports suggest they are under increasing pressure from the expanding Hells Angels and Mongols, both of whom view bandito-controlled areas as vulnerable. The bandidos' strict requirement that members own Harley-Davidson motorcycles limits recruitment compared to clubs that have abandoned traditional biker standards. This has slowed their growth and left them exposed to more aggressive rivals. The club also suffered major setbacks in New South Wales during 2025. In November, Raptor squad raids charged 9 alleged members over firearms offenses, drug trafficking, and related crimes in the Hunter region. Several senior figures now face lengthy prison sentences, significantly weakening the club's leadership and operational capacity in the state. Across New South Wales, law enforcement estimates there are approximately 15 to 20 bikie clubhouses. The exact number constantly fluctuates as police seize properties under proceeds of crime laws and clubs relocate to avoid detection. New South Wales remains the epicenter of Australia's BIKIE wars, where shifting alliances, expanding empires, and relentless police pressure continue to redraw the criminal map in real time. The Raptor Squad's aggressive enforcement strategy has turned permanent clubhouses from assets into liabilities. As a result, many outlaw motorcycle clubs have shifted toward temporary meeting locations and encrypted communications rather than maintaining fixed headquarters. Victoria, particularly Melbourne, remains a major BIKIE stronghold despite strict anti-gang laws that ban the public display of club colours. With Australia's second-largest population, wealthy suburbs, active drug markets, and major port facilities in Melbourne, the state is nearly as valuable as New South Wales for organised crime groups. Historically, the rebels dominated Victoria, with their national headquarters based in the state. However, cracks in their dominance became visible during the July 2025 Last Hurrah ride ahead of the colours ban. Around 200 bikies rode from the New South Wales border into Melbourne, signalling both defiance of new legislation and an acknowledgement that the era of public displays was coming to an end. The ride attracted intense media coverage and a heavy police presence, with Raptor Squad and Victoria Police documenting every participant for intelligence purposes. The Hells Angels operate multiple chapters across Melbourne. Their Altona North and Thomastown clubhouses have been frequent targets of police raids and, in some cases, firebombings by rival groups. These properties, often worth millions of dollars, serve as both operational bases and real estate investments. Portions of these buildings are sometimes rented out for legitimate purposes, complicating law enforcement efforts to seize them under proceeds of crime laws. The Mongols maintain a significant presence in Victoria, particularly in southeastern suburbs such as Dandenong and Casey. They have been involved in violent territorial disputes over drug markets, including shootings and serious assaults that have alarmed local communities. Their aggressive expansion strategy prioritizes rapid territory acquisition over keeping a low profile, drawing increased attention from law enforcement. The Comancheros operate primarily in Melbourne's western suburbs, including Sunshine and Footscray, areas known for diverse populations and active drug markets. Their Victorian operations are closely linked to New South Wales networks, forming interstate supply chains that distribute drugs throughout southeastern Australia. In Victoria, the club's transformation from a traditional motorcycle gang into a sophisticated criminal network is especially clear, with many members joining for criminal opportunities rather than a shared motorcycle culture. They also maintain a strong presence in Melbourne and outer areas such as Cranbourne West. Their Victorian clubhouse was raided in 2019 during an attempted murder investigation and later firebombed by rivals, highlighting the ongoing violence between clubs. Despite these setbacks, they continue to operate in the state, focusing on drug trafficking and the extortion of legitimate businesses. The Bandidos have established chapters in Victoria, but generally maintain a lower public profile than larger clubs. They are more selective in recruitment and operations, favoring stable criminal enterprises over high-profile conflicts that attract police attention. This cautious approach has allowed them to operate with less disruption than clubs engaged in open turf wars. Regional Victorian cities such as Wodonga, near the New South Wales border, are seeing increased BIKIE activity, while other areas host smaller localized clubs. Outlaw motorcycle gangs in Victoria continue to maintain territorial control, despite intensifying police pressure driven by strict anti-association laws and advanced surveillance capabilities. Victoria has introduced some of the toughest anti-gang legislation in Australia, including a ban on wearing gang colours in public spaces that came into effect in late 2025. Enforcement initially began with warnings before escalating to fines and arrests. While these laws reduce visible gang activity, they also push clubs further underground, fragmenting their operations and making it more difficult for police to track membership and criminal activity using traditional surveillance methods. Queensland serves as Australia's drug highway. The state is a critical gateway for drug importation routes from Asia and the Pacific Islands. Control of Queensland territory provides access to distribution networks that supply the entire eastern seaboard, making it one of the most strategically valuable regions for organized crime. The Mongols have expanded aggressively in southeastern Queensland, triggering direct territorial conflict with the Comancheros. Police intelligence indicates this turf war involves frequent violent incidents, including shootings, stabbings, home invasions, and public confrontations that have terrorized residents in affected suburbs. Both clubs view control of Queensland as essential to their national operations, justifying the ongoing risks and violence. The Comancheros maintain a strong presence in Queensland despite pressure from the Mongols. They have invested heavily in operations linked to international supply networks through Brisbane's port facilities and the Gold Coast's proximity to Pacific Island nations. Their Middle Eastern connections provide access to cocaine and heroin importation networks that smaller clubs are unable to match. The rebels also have extensive chapters across Queensland, historically making it their strongest state outside Victoria. However, the mass exodus of members in 2024 significantly weakened their Queensland operations. Several chapters lost members to rival clubs, such as the Hells Angels and Mongols, reducing their territorial control and operational strength. The Bandidos have maintained a long-standing presence in Queensland, particularly in the Gold Coast and Brisbane regions. They generally operate with a lower public profile while running steady criminal enterprises, including drug trafficking, prostitution, and illegal gambling. Their longevity has provided deep community ties and a level of political influence that newer clubs lack. The Hells Angels have expanded into Queensland in recent years, establishing chapters that link their New South Wales operations with northern markets. Their international reputation aids recruitment, attracting individuals who see the club's global network as offering greater criminal opportunities than domestic-only organizations. Smaller clubs such as the Finks also operate in Queensland but face constant pressure from larger organizations that view their territories as vulnerable. Queensland's vast distances between population centers make territorial control resource-intensive, a challenge smaller clubs often struggle to overcome. The state's geography creates unique challenges for both criminals and law enforcement. The large distances between Brisbane, the Gold Coast, the Sunshine Coast, Cairns, Townsville, and regional centres mean a club dominant in Brisbane may have little or no presence in far northern Queensland. This fragmentation allows smaller clubs to control isolated areas with limited interference from major organisations. Queensland's proximity to Papua New Guinea, Indonesia, and Pacific nations makes it critical for drug importation. Control of ports and coastal regions directly translates into criminal revenue worth hundreds of millions of dollars annually. These potential profits fuel the violence and attract intense law enforcement attention. South Australia represents the historical heartland of Australian outlaw motorcycle gangs. Adelaide is the birthplace of several major clubs and maintains unique criminal dynamics due to its smaller population and geographic isolation from the eastern states. The Finks were founded in Adelaide in 1969 and continue to hold their strongest presence in South Australia, despite expanding nationally. Their deep historical roots have created strong community ties and political influence that are difficult for externally established clubs to replicate. In many Adelaide neighbourhoods, family and social connections to Finks members create networks of loyalty and silence that continue to complicate law enforcement investigations. The rebels maintain a significant presence in South Australia, where they compete directly with the Finks for dominance. The rivalry between these clubs in Adelaide is intense and deeply personal, dating back decades and often involving family feuds that extend beyond organizational disputes. Violence between the rebels and the Finks in Adelaide frequently stems from long-standing historical grievances rather than immediate criminal competition. The Comancheros have expanded into South Australia in recent years, bringing interstate connections and resources that disrupt long-established power structures. Their arrival has been met with resistance from both the rebels and the Finks, who view them as outsiders attempting to take control of markets they have dominated for generations. Smaller clubs also operate throughout South Australia, making the landscape more complex than the state's population size might suggest. Groups such as the Descendants MC, Gypsy Jokers, and others maintain control over specific suburbs and regional areas, creating a shifting patchwork of territories as clubs expand or contract. Recent developments include the imprisonment of Hells Angels member Benjamin Tabar in South Australia on drug trafficking and firearms charges, signaling the club's growing presence in the state. The Hells Angels' international reputation continues to attract South Australian criminals who see membership as a gateway to opportunities beyond what local clubs can offer. Adelaide's relatively small size means BIKIE conflicts are more personal and highly visible. Disputes that might go unnoticed in Sydney or Melbourne often make headlines in Adelaide, where residents are more likely to know the families involved. This visibility places pressure on politicians to introduce tough anti-gang legislation, which in turn forces clubs to operate more covertly and rely less on traditional displays of power. Western Australia represents the isolated frontier of Australia's BIKIE landscape. Its geographic separation from the eastern states creates conditions in which local clubs operate with greater autonomy from national leadership structures. The rebels have historically maintained a strong presence in Western Australia, although internal disputes in 2024 centered on Western Australian boss Carl LeBrook significantly altered the club's position. His conflict with National President Damien Vella triggered a mass exodus that weakened the rebels nationwide. Many of the 36 departing members came from Western Australian chapters, fundamentally reshaping the state's BIKIE hierarchy. The Comancheros have expanded into Western Australia, establishing operations linked to international criminal networks through Perth's port facilities. Their transformation into a transnational crime organization is particularly evident in the state, where they focus on large-scale drug importation and money laundering rather than traditional BIKIE activities. The Gypsy Jokers remain one of the most powerful clubs in Western Australia, with a strong presence in Perth and surrounding regions. They are among the few non-Big Six clubs to maintain significant regional dominance, controlling territories and criminal markets that Eastern-based organizations have struggled to penetrate. Their long-standing presence, dating back to 1969, has given them deep community roots and influence. The Phoenix once maintained a strong Perth chapter, but dramatic internal changes, including a mass patchover to other clubs in late 2013, significantly reduced their presence. While diminished, the remaining members have slowly rebuilt their operations. The Bandidos also operate in Western Australia, focusing on stable, long-term criminal enterprises rather than aggressive expansion that would attract law enforcement attention. Their strategy prioritizes sustained profitability over rapid growth. Perth's isolation shapes supply chains differently than in the eastern states. Drugs and weapons are more commonly sourced through routes linked to Southeast Asia rather than domestic Australian networks. While this creates opportunities for clubs with strong international connections, it also limits access to mainland markets, reducing Western Australia's overall strategic value compared to the eastern seaboard. This is what is fundamentally changing Australia's BIKIE landscape. The founding era of Australia's one-percenter motorcycle clubs, a term borrowed from American biker culture claiming that 99% of motorcyclists are law-abiding citizens, is over. The bearded bikers of the past are being replaced by a very different demographic. According to law enforcement intelligence and investigative journalists who have penetrated these organizations, the so-called Big Six now include large numbers of members who do not fit the traditional image of white, working-class men in leather vests, riding Harley-Davidsons. Middle Eastern Australians have been heavily recruited, particularly within the Comancheros and several other clubs. In some chapters, especially in Western Sydney where Middle Eastern communities are concentrated, these members now make up a substantial proportion of the membership. They bring connections to established Middle Eastern organized crime families, creating powerful links between BIKIE gangs and criminal networks that previously operated separately. This new generation is far less interested in motorcycle culture and far more focused on criminal enterprise. Clubs are viewed as business structures that provide access to drug markets, money laundering operations, and protection from rivals, rather than as brotherhoods built on tradition and loyalty. They are younger, more technologically savvy, and more willing to use extreme violence. Traditional bikies often followed unwritten rules about avoiding civilian casualties and unnecessary brutality, seeing themselves as outlaws bound by a code of conduct. The new breed operates with far fewer restraints, treating violence as a business tool to be used whenever it offers a strategic advantage. This shift has resulted in more public casualties and increasingly brazen attacks, alarming both communities and law enforcement. It has also created deep internal tensions within several clubs. Older members resent the abandonment of traditions they see as central to club identity, while newer recruits view those traditions as obstacles to maximizing profit. Complaints from veteran members are often dismissed as outdated thinking. The result is organizations that still resemble BIKIE gangs on the surface, but function internally more like modern organized crime syndicates. As of early 2026, Australia's BIKIE territory map looks roughly like this. In New South Wales, the Hells Angels are expanding aggressively in the Hunter and Northern regions. The Comancheros remain strong in western and southwestern Sydney, while the Mongols push into contested areas once controlled by weakened rivals. The rebels still maintain a presence, but their influence has been significantly reduced following internal fractures and major police operations. In Victoria, the rebels were historically dominant but are now in decline. The Hells Angels operate multiple chapters across Melbourne. The Mongols are active in the southeastern suburbs, and the Comancheros control key western areas. The Finks remain active in Melbourne and regional centres. Queensland remains fiercely contested, with ongoing conflict between the Mongols and Comancheros in the southeast. The rebels continue to operate chapters across the state. The Bandidos dominate parts of the Gold Coast, and the Hells Angels are expanding into northern regions. In South Australia, the Finks retain influence due to their historical roots, while the rebels remain competitive. The Comancheros are expanding from interstate, and the Hells Angels are establishing a growing presence. In Western Australia, the rebels have been fractured by leadership disputes, opening the door for the Comancheros to expand. The Gypsy Jokers remain regionally strong, while other clubs compete for influence and territory. Tasmania has a limited BIKIE presence, primarily involving the rebels and a handful of smaller clubs. In the Northern Territory, various clubs, including the rebels and Comancheros, operate mainly around the Darwin area. This map remains fluid and constantly changing. Territory is gained and lost through violence, negotiation, and law enforcement disruption. What is controlled today may be contested tomorrow as clubs expand, fracture, or collapse under internal and external pressure. The war for territory continues across Australia, fought in suburban streets and measured in power, influence, and criminal profit.